Welcome, my friend. Let everything slow. Of all the figures who walk beside the Tarnished through the lands between, none is stranger or more tender than Melina. She appears at the roadside before the first great battle, offers a bargain no other soul offers, and asks for nothing in return, but the chance to finish a purpose she barely understands herself. She is not quite alive in any way the living would recognize, and yet she is the closest thing the Tarnished has to a companion for the length of the whole journey. Tonight we begin her story with the first meeting and the strange bargain she offers. Tonight we sit with the Nameless Maiden and the accord she offers the Tarnished. Tonight we sit with the Nameless Maiden, the mysterious companion who first meets the Tarnished on the road to the Erdtree. A stranger by the roadside. Before the Tarnished has faced any great foe, a pale figure appears at a quiet site of rest, offering a bargain that will shape the whole journey ahead. In the earliest hours of the journey, long before the great battles that await further down the road, the Tarnished comes to rest at a quiet site along the way. And there, without warning, a figure appears who was not there a moment before. A young woman, pale and slight, wrapped in dark travelling cloth, her manner grave and old beyond her seeming years. She introduces herself with a single word, offering a name that she herself admits is not her own. A borrowed word standing in for something she cannot or will not name outright. She calls herself Melina and asks the Tarnished to hear an offer. The bargain she proposes is unlike any other in the lands between. She explains that the Tarnished, cut off from grace and from the guidance most travellers receive, walks the road without a maiden of their own, the kind of guide that others are given from the moment they set out. She offers to fill that absence herself, to take up runes gathered along the way and turn them into strength, granting the Tarnished the power to grow with every fallen foe. In exchange, she asks only one thing, that the Tarnished carry her toward the foot of the Erdtree, the great golden tree at the heart of the realm, when the time comes. There is something quietly extraordinary in how this offer is made. Melina does not command, does not threaten, does not demand obedience the way so many other powers in the lands between do. She asks, plainly, and waits for an answer, treating the Tarnished as someone whose consent matters. For a wanderer who has spent the length of an age forgotten and forsaken, stripped of grace and left to wander without purpose, this is itself a kind of gift, to be asked rather than merely used. And so begins one of the strangest and most enduring partnerships in all the lands between, sealed with a quiet agreement between two travellers who barely know one another, rather than with any formal oath. It is worth pausing on the strangeness of the timing, for Melina does not appear on some grand occasion, but at one of the quietest moments of the whole journey. The Tarnished has barely left the roads near the gate, has faced no demigod, has claimed no great victory. And yet, it is here before any of that Melina chooses to make herself known. This suggests something patient in her nature, a willingness to wait for the right moment, rather than force herself upon the traveller at the first opportunity. She could have appeared earlier, at the very shore where the Tarnished first washes up in the lands between, or later, once some proof of worth had been shown. Instead, she comes at this particular threshold, as though she has been watching, weighing, and has judged this the moment to step forward. And there is a vulnerability in how she presents herself that is easy to overlook amid the strangeness of the bargain. She does not arrive armoured, does not arrive with any show of force to back her claims. She stands before the Tarnished as a slight and solitary figure, extending trust before she has any guarantee it will be returned. in a realm where nearly every power the Tarnished meets is armed, fortified, or hidden behind walls and wards. Melina meets the Wanderer with nothing but her word and her purpose, a fragility that makes the whole exchange feel less like a transaction between strangers and more like the first tentative step of something that might, in time, become trust. The name that is not her own. Melina admits from the very first meeting that the name she offers is not her own, a small confession that hints at a deeper mystery beneath her calm and careful manner. It would be easy to pass over this detail, buried as it is in a brief exchange at the start of a long journey. But Melina tells the Tarnished plainly, in her very first words, that the name she gives is not her true one. She gives no explanation for why this should be so, no hint of what her real name might be, or why it cannot be spoken. She sets the fact before the Tarnished as a small, quiet truth, and moves on to the matter of the bargain, as though the naming of herself were a lesser concern beside the purpose she carries. This small confession sets the tone for everything that follows. Melina will answer questions when asked, and she will speak of her purpose when the moment calls for it, but she will never explain herself in whole, never lay bare the entirety of what she is or where she comes from. She gives fragments, hints, and quiet admissions, trusting the Tarnished to piece together what they can from what little she is willing to share. Even her chosen name, the very first thing she extends, comes wrapped in this same reticence, a gift given with one hand and quietly qualified with the other. There is a particular kind of restraint at work here, one that separates Melina from every other figure of power in the lands between. The demigods speak of their own greatness at length, each certain that their story is the one worth telling. The gods who lurk behind the Elden Ring reveal themselves only through great and terrible acts, their nature written in ruin rather than words. Melina does neither. She neither boasts of what she is, nor conceals herself entirely, choosing instead a narrow path between silence and confession, telling just enough to be understood as trustworthy, while withholding whatever might undo the fragile balance of the bargain she proposes. And there is a hint, buried in this reticence, of something she herself may not wholly grasp. It is one thing to withhold a truth one knows and chooses not to share. It is another to withhold a truth because its full shape is not yet clear even to oneself. Melina speaks of her purpose the way one speaks of an instruction half remembered, present and certain in its broad outline but hazy in its particulars. Her caution about her own name may be, in part, an honest admission that the word she was given may not capture whatever she really is, that Melina is only the nearest sound she has found for something that has no easy name at all. There is a quiet echo here of something the Tarnished will come to recognize across the whole of the lands between. The way names, in this shattered realm, so often fail to hold the weight of what they name. Titles are claimed and discarded. Identities are shed like old skin, and even gods have gone by names that were later proven only partial truths. Melina's uncertainty about her own name places her within this same pattern from her very first appearance, a small sign that whatever she is, she belongs to a world where the surface of a thing and its true nature are rarely the same. Long before the Tarnished learns anything further of her origin, this first quiet confession has already told them something true, that Melina, like so much else in the lands between, will have to be understood by more than her name alone. And there is a tenderness in this honesty, however strange it might seem. Melina could have given any name and let the Tarnished believe it true, sparing herself the trouble of the admission. Instead, She chooses honesty even where a small deception would have cost her nothing, telling the Tarnished from their first meeting that there are things about her that remain hidden, and that this hiding is itself part of who she is. It is a fitting introduction to a companion who will walk beside the Tarnished for the length of the whole journey, while remaining, in some essential way, always just out of reach. A companion, unlike any other. Melina's bargain marks her as something wholly different from the other guides and gods of the lands between. A companion who offers her presence rather than her command. Across the lands between, the Tarnished encounters many powers who wish to direct their path. The two fingers, speaking through their chosen vessels, call the Tarnished home and set them toward the Elden ring. The demigods, who hold the shattered pieces of the ring, each pursue their own designs, indifferent or hostile to any traveller who crosses their path. Even the grace that guides the Tarnished from side to side feels, in its way, like the hand of something distant and unseen, pulling the wanderer forward without explanation. Melina stands apart from all of this, for she is present in a way none of these other powers are, walking the road itself rather than directing it from afar. This presence is what makes her bargain so different from the countless other calls to purpose the Tarnished receives. She does not merely point toward a destination and vanish. She remains, appearing again and again at each place of rest, offering her strange gift of strength each time the Tarnished pauses to reflect on the road behind them. She becomes, in this way, less like a distant patron and more like a fellow traveller, one who happens to carry a purpose of her own, but who chooses, again and again, to walk alongside rather than only ahead. And there is something else that sets her apart, something the Tarnished may not notice at first, but which colours every later exchange between them. Melina asks nothing of the Tarnished beyond the bargain itself. She does not ask them to become a particular kind of lord, does not press them toward one faction or another among the warring powers of the lands between, does not demand loyalty beyond the simple promise to carry her toward the Erdtree when her purpose calls for it, in a realm crowded with gods and demigods each certain of their own claim upon the Tarnished's fate. Melina extends something rarer, a bargain that leaves room for the traveller to remain, in every other respect, entirely their own. This restraint stands in sharp contrast to nearly every other power the Tarnished will encounter. The two fingers, speaking through their chosen vessels, expect obedience to a distant and unseen will. The demigods, who scheme across their shattered domains, see every traveller as either a tool or a threat, weighed only by how they might serve or endanger some larger design. Even grace itself, guiding the Tarnished from sight to sight, carries an unspoken pressure to follow the path it lays out. Melina alone seems content to let the Tarnished choose their own road, asking only that the road lead, in its own time, toward her. It is a small thing, perhaps, to be given a choice rather than a command, but in the lands, between it is rare enough to feel remarkable. Every other power the Tarnished will meet carries some claim upon them, some design they are expected to serve whether they wish it or not. Melina's bargain is, by contrast, oddly humble. She asks for a destination, not a devotion, and leaves the manner of the journey entirely in the Tarnished's own hands. Whatever grand purpose lies behind her request, she chooses, at least at the outset, to make it feel small and simple, a favour asked between equals rather than a duty imposed from above. Perhaps this is why the bond between them, however strange its beginning, comes to feel like something worth calling friendship, however unlikely that word might seem, applied to a maiden who admits from the outset that even her own name is borrowed. She gives her presence without insisting on control, her guidance without demanding conformity, her purpose without making it the Tarnished's burden to share. Whatever she is, and whatever mystery still surrounds her, she begins the journey as something the lands between rarely offer. A companion who asks to walk alongside, rather than a power that insists on walking ahead. It is worth remembering, too, how little the Tarnished has to lose by accepting her bargain, and how much this small fact reveals about the shape of the world she steps into. A wanderer, stripped of grace, exiled and forgotten, has few offers worth taking, fewer still that come without some hidden cost attached. Melina's arrival, then, is not merely strange for its gentleness. It is strange because gentleness of any kind is so rare a thing to find along these roads at all. Among crumbling castles and warring demigods and the endless machinery of a shattered order, she is the first sign the Tarnished receives that the lands between might still hold room for something as simple as a companion who chooses to stay. Whoever or whatever she is beneath the borrowed name, that first quiet choice to stay will echo through every part of the long road still to come. What she is, and where such a strange and gentle companion could have come from, is the story we turn to next. Tomorrow we sit with her birth at the foot of the Erdtree, and the mother whose purpose she has carried since. For everything that follows in her long and quiet story begins here, at a single moment when a stranger chose to ask rather than command, and a wanderer chose to answer. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with Melina's birth at the foot of the Erdtree, and the mother whose purpose she has carried since. Melina offers little of her own history when she first meets the Tarnished, content to let the bargain speak for itself, but scattered through her later words, and confirmed at last by a single relic uncovered deep in the Shadow Realm, lies the truth of where she comes from. She is a daughter of the Golden Tree itself, born to the highest and most terrible mother in all the lands between, carrying a purpose given to her before she ever set foot upon the roads the Tarnished walks. Tonight we sit with her birth at the foot of the Erdtree, and the mother whose purpose she has carried since. Tonight we sit with Melina's birth at the foot of the Erdtree, and the mother whose purpose she has carried since. Marika's hidden daughter. A relic found far from the lands between confirms what her own words had only hinted at. Melina is a daughter of Queen Marika, and sister to one of the most feared of the demigods. Through the whole of the base journey, Melina speaks of her mother only in passing, careful phrases that suggest a great deal while confirming little. She tells the Tarnished that her purpose was given to her by her mother inside the Erdtree long ago, and leaves the matter there, as though the identity of that mother were a thing too large to speak aloud. Players who listen closely could guess at who this mother might be, for only one figure in the lands between holds a claim over the Erdtree great enough to fit Melina's careful words. But the guess remained only a guess for a long while, unconfirmed by anything beyond her own careful phrasing. That changed with the discovery of a single relic tied to Messmer, the fire-cursed demigod who ruled a hidden realm beyond the Golden Tree. An item found in his domain, describing Kindling bound to his own fire, speaks plainly of a younger sister who once dwelt within the Erdtree and foresaw its burning. This is the confirmation players had long suspected. Melina is Marika's daughter and the sister of Messmer, the two of them bound by blood in a way neither had spoken of outright before. What had been careful implication became settled fact, carried across an item most players might otherwise have overlooked entirely. This revelation reshapes everything Melina had told the Tarnished up to that point. Her purpose was a mission given by the Queen and God herself, rather than some borrowed instruction handed down by a distant power who shaped the whole of the Golden Order. Passed from mother to daughter in words the Tarnished will never hear in whole. And it places Melina among a company few would have guessed she belonged to. The mighty and often terrible children of Marika, siblings to demigods who have shattered kingdoms and burned whole peoples to ash in the pursuit of their own inherited purposes. There is a further curiosity buried in how this confirmation arrived. It came through a single relic found deep in a hidden realm, rather than through any grand declaration within the lands. Between itself, most Tarnished would never think to search, tied to a demigod so feared and so obscure that few players had reason to link the two figures at all. This is fitting in its way, for a maiden who has spent the whole of the journey speaking of herself only in fragments. Even the confirmation of her parentage arrives sideways, discovered rather than declared. A truth the lands between seem determined to keep half hidden even once it has come to light at last. And the naming itself carries its own quiet pattern, one that watchful travellers have long noticed among Marika's children. Messmer, Melina, Michaela, Melina, 4 names sharing the same opening sound, a small echo running through the family, the way certain names run through royal lines in the world beyond the game. It is a detail easy to dismiss as coincidence, and nothing in the lands between confirms it as anything more than that. But once the blood tie between Melina and Messmer was set beyond doubt, this quiet chime of shared syllables became harder to read as accident. One more thread binding a daughter who speaks so little of her family to a lineage that shaped the whole of the Golden Age. Born within the Golden Tree. Unlike her siblings, who were raised and armed and set loose upon the lands between, Melina was born and kept within the Erdtree itself, a beginning unlike any other among Marika's children. Every other child of Marika that the Tarnished encounters was raised in the world beyond the Golden Tree, granted a domain, a great room, an army, a place among the mighty of the lands between. Godric clung to his crumbling castle. Rykard turned to blasphemy in his volcanic manor. Melina and her twin were sheltered in a distant refuge of their own making. Each of Marika's children, however cursed or however scorned, had a place in the world outside the tree. Melina's origin breaks this pattern entirely, for she tells the Tarnished plainly that she was born inside the Erdtree, within the Golden Tree that stands at the very center of the Golden Order, rather than beneath its branches or beyond its reach. This detail carries a weight easy to overlook on first hearing. To be born within the Erdtree is to be born within the closest thing the lands between holds to the seat of the divine, the Golden Tree that channels the will of distant gods and anchors the whole order of the world. None of Marika's other children claim so intimate a birthplace. They were born of her, certainly, in blood and in power, but they grew up in castles and manors and hidden refuges scattered across the realm. Melina alone speaks of the tree itself as her cradle, a beginning that ties her to the very heart of the Golden Order in a way her siblings, for all their might, were never granted. There is a strange intimacy in this that sets Melina apart, even from the other children who might be called Empyreans, those rare few among Marika's line touched with the potential to become gods in their own right. Those siblings, whatever power stirred in them, were still raised beneath the open sky, still walked the same soil the Tarnished walks. Melina's account places her somewhere else entirely, inside the tree, within the very structure that holds the Golden Order together, closer to the root of things than any of her kin. Whether this closeness marks her as something greater than her siblings or something altogether different from them, the lands between never says outright, leaving the question to hang alongside so much else about her. It is one more mystery the Tarnished must carry forward, unanswered, as the long road continues, and there is a further mystery tangled into this origin, one the lands between never resolve outright. Some who have studied her words closely note that Melina's account of her own birth sits uneasily beside the timeline of her siblings, hinting that she may have come into being later than the others, perhaps even after the shattering had already begun, when Marika herself was crucified and sealed within the golden tree as punishment for breaking the Elden Ring. If this reading holds any truth, then Melina was born during the very years her mother spent imprisoned inside the Erdtree, rather than merely sheltered within it, a daughter conceived and raised in the depths of her mother's own captivity, rather than in the golden age that came before. If this timeline is correct, it sets Melina apart from her siblings in a way that reaches far beyond mere birthplace. Godric, Rykard, Melina, Miquella, and the rest grew to adulthood in a world still whole, still golden, still governed by the order their mother had built before her great rebellion broke it apart. Melina, by this reading, would have known no such world at all. She would have come into being already within the ruin, shaped from her first moment by a mother who was herself imprisoned, cursed, and cut off from the realm she had once ruled outright, where her siblings inherited a broken world after knowing wholeness. Melina may never have known anything but the breaking itself. This would help explain, too, why her purpose looks so different from theirs. The other demigods each received a shard of the ring and a place in a war meant to determine who would mend it. A war that presupposed a golden age worth restoring or replacing. A daughter born after that golden age had already ended, inside a tree that had already become her mother's prison, might well be given a different kind of task altogether. One suited not to claiming the throne of a fallen order, but to ending, at last, the long stalemate that order had become. Whether or not this timeline is the true one, it offers a shape that fits everything else Melina says and does across her long companionship with the Tarnished. A purpose given in the dark. Whatever the truth of her birth, Melina carries a purpose passed to her by Marika herself, one whose full shape she claims to have understood only much later, on the road with the Tarnished. Melina speaks of her purpose the way one might speak of an inheritance received before it could be properly explained, a duty handed down complete in its weight, but incomplete in its meaning. Her mother gave her this purpose within the Erdtree, long before the Tarnished ever crossed her path, and Melina carried it forward without, by her own admission, grasping in whole what it demanded of her. It is only much later in the journey, after trials and battles the Tarnished shares with her, that she comes to understand what her mother really asked of her: to see the golden tree burned, so that a new lord might take the throne it has denied for so long. This is a strange kind of inheritance to carry, quite unlike the great runes and armies handed to her siblings. Godric received a castle and a shard of the shattered ring. Rykard received a volcanic domain and the serpent's hunger that would consume him. Melina received no land, no army, no fragment of the ring to call her own. What she carries instead is an idea half understood, a purpose she must grow into rather than one she was given whole and complete, discovering its true shape only as the long road toward the Erdtree unfolds around her. There is something in this that speaks to a deeper truth about who Melina is within her mother's design. Where the other demigods were armed and sent forth to war over the shattered pieces of the ring, each set against the others by Marika's own instruction, Melina was given something quieter and stranger, a task to fulfill in secret, rather than a shard to fight for. Alongside a stranger the Golden Order itself would never have chosen. She is not a rival for the throne in the manner of her siblings, and she does not scheme for the shards the others bled over. She is something else entirely within her mother's plan, a piece set aside from the war of the shattering to serve a purpose that only makes sense once the whole of the ring has already been sought, and the golden tree still stands, sealed and untouched, waiting for a hand willing to burn it down. There is a particular kind of loneliness folded into this arrangement, one Melina rarely names, but which shapes the whole of her long companionship with the Tarnished. Her siblings, whatever their fates, at least had one another as rivals and as mirrors, each measuring their own ambitions against the others who held the remaining shards. Melina had no such company. Her purpose set her apart from that war entirely, alone with an instruction she barely understood, waiting for a traveller who did not yet exist to help her carry it out. Whatever else her mother intended in setting this task before her, it left Melina without the one thing every other demigod possessed in abundance: kin who shared her burden, even in rivalry. This may be why the bargain she offers the Tarnished carries the weight it does. She is not merely securing an ally for a task she could manage alone. She is, in a sense, finding company for a purpose she has carried in isolation since her mother first gave it to her within the tree. The Tarnished becomes, whether either of them says so outright, the first companion Melina has ever had in the whole of her strange existence, a fellow traveller where her siblings had only rivals, and where she herself had only a task and a tree that held her in silence for however long her solitary waiting lasted. Seen this way, her earlier gentleness at the roadside takes on a further layer of meaning. A maiden raised alone within her mother's stronghold, given a purpose but denied companionship, might reasonably approach her first true ally with the same careful tenderness Melina shows from their very first meeting. She has no experience of rivalry to draw upon, no lifetime spent measuring herself against siblings who might betray her for a shard of the ring. What she offers the Tarnished instead is something closer to a first attempt at trust itself, offered by a daughter whose whole life until that point had been purpose without company, and instruction without anyone to share the weight of carrying it. What this purpose asks of her, and how she comes at last to understand it in whole, is bound up with everything else that follows on the long road to the tree. What this purpose asks of her, and how she comes at last to understand it in whole, is bound up with everything else that follows on the long road to the tree. Tomorrow we sit with her strange nature as a companion, the Kindling Maiden who guides the Tarnished, though she can barely touch the world she walks through. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with Melina as the Kindling Maiden, the strange spirit companion who guides the Tarnished through the lands between. Every chosen soul who sets out toward the Elden Ring is meant to walk with a maiden at their side, a guide granted by the powers that call them home. The Tarnished has no such guide, cast out and forgotten long before any maiden could be assigned to them. Melina fills that absence, and in filling it, reveals herself to be stranger than any ordinary maiden could ever be, a companion whose body may already be gone, a spirit who walks the roads of the living while barely belonging to them. Tonight we sit with Melina as the Kindling Maiden, the strange spirit companion who guides the Tarnished through the lands between. Tonight we sit with Melina as the Kindling Maiden, the strange spirit companion who guides the Tarnished through the lands between. The maiden the Tarnished never had. Among the chosen of the two fingers, every rightful candidate for the throne is given a finger maiden to guide them. The Tarnished has none, and Melina steps into the gap this absence leaves behind. Across the lands between, those called back by the two fingers to seek the Elden Ring are not sent out alone. Each is granted a finger maiden, a guide who tends to them, reads the will of the distant power that summoned them, and helps them grow strong enough for the trials ahead. This is the ordinary shape of the calling, chosen soul and appointed maiden walking the road together, one lending purpose and the other lending strength. It is the arrangement every proper candidate for Elden Lord is meant to receive. The Tarnished receives no such arrangement. Cast out long before this particular calling began, stripped of grace and left to wander forgotten for an age, the Tarnished is what the lands between calls maidenless, summoned home at last, but given no guide to walk beside them. This absence marks the Tarnished as something unusual, even among the chosen. A candidate for the throne who arrives without the one companion every other candidate is granted from the very start. It is into this gap, this missing place where a proper maiden should stand, that Melina steps. She does not claim to be a true finger maiden in the way the term is usually meant, and nothing in her words suggests the two fingers themselves sent her. Instead, she offers to fill the role by her own choice, taking up the duties a maiden would ordinarily perform, tending the Tarnished's strength and walking their road, without ever claiming the title outright. This is, in its way, another quiet act of generosity folded into her strange bargain. She gives the maidenless Tarnished something the lands between itself withheld from them, filling an absence that no other power seemed willing to notice, let alone remedy. There is something worth marking in how deliberately she avoids the title, even as she performs nearly every duty that title implies. A lesser companion might have claimed the role outright, borrowing the authority the name carries to secure the Tarnished's trust more quickly. Melina does the opposite, performing the function while withholding the claim, as though the title of Finger Maiden belongs to a different kind of arrangement entirely, one sanctioned by the distant power she may not answer to at all. She helps as a maiden helps, but she does so on her own terms, a distinction that seems to matter to her, even if the Tarnished, weighing only the practical gift of strength, might never think to ask why. This carries a quiet implication about where Melina's true loyalties lie. A proper finger maiden serves the will of the two fingers first, and the Tarnished second, her guidance shaped by instructions passed down from that distant and unseen power. Melina's guidance answers to no such chain of command that she ever names. Whatever compels her to walk this road, it traces back to her mother, and to the purpose given within the Erdtree, not to the two fingers who summoned the Tarnished home in the first place. She fills the shape of a finger maiden without ever really serving the power that role was built to serve, a quiet independence woven into even her most practical acts of care. This distinction matters more than it might first appear, for it means the Tarnished's whole journey is guided, in part, by two competing purposes that never quite align. The two fingers wish the Tarnished to mend the Elden Ring and take the throne as a new Elden Lord, restoring some version of the order that has ruled since the Golden Age. Melina's purpose points elsewhere entirely, toward the burning of the very tree that order depends upon. The Tarnished walks a road shaped by grace on one hand and by Melina's quiet, unspoken agenda on the other. Two forces pulling in directions that will not remain compatible forever, however smoothly they seem to align in these early days of the journey. It is a fault line running beneath the whole partnership from its very first moment, invisible for now, waiting for the road to bring it into the open. A spirit bound to the living. Melina is something closer to a spirit, rather than wholly present in the world the way the Tarnished is, who travels alongside the living without quite belonging among them. There is a strangeness to how Melina moves through the lands, between that becomes clearer the longer the Tarnished travels with her. She appears at sites of rest and vanishes again just as easily, present in one moment and absent the next, without the ordinary business of walking, riding or resting that marks the movement of living things. She does not eat, does not sleep in any way the Tarnished witnesses, and never speaks of hunger, cold or weariness, the small discomforts that mark an ordinary traveller's road. She moves as something closer to a spirit than a body, attending the Tarnished's journey without being wholly bound to the same rules that govern it. This is not incidental to who she is. Melina herself hints, in careful and reluctant phrases, that her presence beside the Tarnished is a kind of borrowed nearness rather than an ordinary companionship between two living bodies. She seems able to draw close to the Tarnished specifically, latching onto their road in a way she could not manage on her own, as though the Tarnished's own passage through the lands between gives her a means of travelling that she would otherwise lack. Without the Tarnished, it is unclear whether Melina could move through the realm at all, or whether she would remain fixed to whatever place first held her, waiting for a traveller willing to carry her forward. There is a poignancy in this arrangement that the bargain's practical terms tend to obscure. Melina is not merely choosing to accompany the Tarnished out of kindness or curiosity. She may, in some real sense, need the Tarnished in order to move through the world at all. The one who offers strength and guidance is, herself, dependent on the very traveller she guides, a spirit whose whole capacity to act in the lands between rests upon the willingness of a stranger to let her walk beside them. The bargain that seemed at first to run only one way, from Melina's gift to the Tarnished's promise, turns out to bind them both in ways neither could manage alone. This mutual dependence sits at an odd angle to the ordinary shape of a guide and a traveller. In most tellings, the one who guides holds the greater power, steering the journey, while the one guided only follows. Melina's arrangement inverts this quietly, without ever announcing the inversion outright. She grants the Tarnished strength with every rune surrendered, yet she cannot go anywhere at all without the Tarnished's continued willingness to carry her along. Power flows one way in the bargain's visible terms, and the other way in its hidden mechanics, each of them in their own fashion, carrying the other forward through a realm neither could cross alone. It is a strange kind of equality between a mortal wanderer and a being scarcely bound to flesh, one neither of them ever names aloud, but which shapes every mile of the road they share. And there is something almost unbearably delicate in what this means for the Tarnished's choices along the road. Every decision to press onward, to linger, or to turn aside is also, whether either of them says so, a decision about whether Melina continues to exist in any active sense at all. She has tied her whole capacity to move and act to the will of a stranger she met at a quiet roadside, trusting that this stranger will keep choosing, day after day, to let her come along. It is a trust offered with remarkably little insurance, given how much of her continued presence in the world depends upon it. Few companions in the whole of the lands between place themselves in such fragile hands, and fewer still do so without ever remarking on the risk. A body already burned. Hints scattered through her words, and the world around her suggests that Melina's body, whatever it once was, may already be gone, leaving only the spirit that walks with the Tarnished now. The clearest sign of what Melina really is comes not from any single declaration, but from the accumulation of small, careful hints she lets fall across the whole of the journey. She speaks, when pressed, of a body that no longer serves her the way an ordinary body should, phrases that suggest loss rather than mere frailty. Something has already happened to her, some event in her past that left her more spirit than flesh, present with the Tarnished in will and purpose, while whatever physical self she once had remains, at best, a diminished and half-real thing trailing behind her words. This detail draws an echo, whether intended or not, with another of Marika's descendants whose body met a fate stranger than death. Rani, faced with a doom she could not otherwise escape, chose to shed her physical form entirely, preserving her spirit while her body perished in the act, continuing on afterward as something closer to will than flesh. Melina's condition is not identical to Rani's, and nothing in the lands between suggests the same ritual or the same choice lies behind it. But the shared shape is hard to miss. Two daughters of the same terrible mother, each existing beyond the world in a way their bodies alone could never have allowed, each carrying on a purpose that flesh proved too fragile to serve. It is worth marking how differently the two of them wear this same strange condition. Rani speaks of her shed body with something close to satisfaction, a price paid deliberately and without regret for the freedom it purchased her. Melina speaks of hers, when she speaks of it at all, with a caution that suggests loss rather than liberation, a thing that happened to her rather than a thing she chose. Where one daughter of Marika made an act of will out of losing her flesh, the other seems to carry her own loss more quietly, less a triumph won than a cost already paid on the way toward a purpose she has not yet finished fulfilling. There is a third figure worth setting alongside these two, though her fate differs from either. Melina, another of Marika's daughters, kept her body but lost something else to a curse she never chose. Her flesh scarred and consumed even as she remained, in some diminished sense, whole. Across these three daughters runs a single grim pattern. To be born of Marika's line seems to invite some cost paid in the body, whether she'd entirely scarred beyond repair, or spent in ways a traveller can only guess at. Melina's particular loss fits neatly into a family history already marked, again and again, by bodies that could not survive intact the purposes their souls were given to carry. It is as though the golden blood that made these daughters mighty also marked each of them for some price the flesh alone could never pay in full. Whatever cost Melina paid to become what she now is, the price seems bound up with the very purpose her mother gave her, a fire she is meant to help kindle rather than merely witness. A maiden tasked with seeing the golden tree burned might well have needed to become something other than ordinary flesh, long before that burning ever took place, her own body already spent in service of a purpose that demanded more than an ordinary life could give. Whether her body was lost willingly, taken from her, or consumed by the weight of what she was always meant to become, the Tarnished walks beside a spirit who has already paid some part of the price her purpose will one day ask in full. There is a certain mercy, oddly enough, in not knowing which of these it was. A body lost willingly speaks of a daughter who chose her fate with open eyes, walking toward her purpose in full knowledge of what it would cost her. A body taken speaks of something crueler, a mother or a fate that demanded this loss, before Melina had any say in the matter at all. The lands. Between never settles the question, and perhaps it is better that it does not, for either answer would colour every later moment between Melina and the Tarnished with a different shade of tragedy. As it stands, the mystery lets her remain what she has been from their first meeting, a spirit whose past is glimpsed only in fragments, walking a road whose ending she alone seems to understand, carrying a wound the Tarnished will never wholly see, and could not, in any case, help her mend. What it means to travel beside a companion who is present and absent at once, who can guide and cannot always be reached, is the story we turn to next. Tomorrow we sit with the sealed eye Melina carries, and the mark it leaves upon everything she is. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with the sealed eye Melina carries, and the mark it leaves upon everything she is. Beneath the calm and careful manner Melina wears through the whole of her long companionship lies a single mark she never once explains. Her right eye, closed and sealed, bearing a small tattoo of 3 fingers pressed into skin that will not open. She never speaks of it unless pressed, and even then her words circle the matter more than they settle it. But this small mark carries a warning bound up with the darkest power in all the lands between, and a hint of what Melina might become should that warning ever go unheeded. Tonight we sit with the sealed eye Melina carries, and the mark it leaves upon everything she is. Tonight we sit with the sealed eye Melina carries, and the mark it leaves upon everything she is. The mark she never explains. A tattoo of 3 fingers marks Melina's closed right eye, a detail she carries through the whole journey without ever offering to explain it. Travel long enough beside Melina, and a careful eye will notice what her calm manner never draws attention to. Her right eye remains closed at all times, sealed shut beneath a small marking pressed into the skin around it. The unmistakable shape of 3 fingers. It is not an injury in any obvious sense, not a wound she mentions or seems troubled by. It is only there, a permanent feature of her face that she carries as quietly as she carries everything else about her strange nature, offered to notice but never to question, present for anyone patient enough to look closely at a companion who otherwise gives so little of herself away. This reticence fits the pattern already familiar from everything else Melina reveals across the journey. She does not volunteer explanations for the parts of herself that might unsettle a stranger, choosing instead to let such details sit quietly until circumstance forces her hand. The sealed eye is, in this sense, one more piece of the same careful withholding that marked her borrowed name and her spectral nature. Another fragment of herself she trusts the Tarnished to notice without demanding she account for it outright. There is a particular kind of discipline required to carry such a mark in silence for as long as Melina does. Most who bore some visible sign of a dangerous power would find some occasion sooner or later to speak of it, if only to explain themselves before a companion could ask. Melina manages the opposite for the whole of the early journey, letting the closed eye remain only a fact of her appearance, unremarked and unexplained, as though drawing attention to it herself would grant it more weight than she wishes it to carry. Whatever burden the sign represents, she seems determined to bear it as quietly as she bears everything else, offering nothing beyond what circumstance later demands of her. And there is a question worth sitting with here, even if the lands between offers no answer, whether Melina herself understands in whole what the closed eye signifies, or whether she too carries it as an inheritance whose full weight remains hidden even from her. Her purpose was given to her within the Erdtree by a mother who explained little and expected much. It would not be strange if this particular inheritance came the same way, a sign pressed into her flesh before she had any say in the matter, its full meaning something she has had to piece together across a long and lonely existence, much as the Tarnished must now piece it together from her own careful silence. And yet, this particular mark carries a weight the others do not. For the symbol pressed into her sealed eye belongs to a power older and darker than nearly anything else the Tarnished will encounter in the lands between. 3 fingers are not a shape chosen at random. They are the sign of a rival power to the very 2 fingers who summoned the Tarnished home, a power whose touch has driven stronger minds than hers to ruin. That such a mark should rest upon Melina's own flesh, sealed shut, as though to contain whatever it signifies, is the first true sign that her strange gentleness may sit closer to genuine danger than anything else she has shown the Tarnished so far. 3 fingers, 1 sealed eye. The mark upon Melina's eye names a power that stands opposed to nearly everything the Golden Order once represented. The 3 fingers and the frenzy that flows from them. Deep within the lands between, hidden from the sight of most who walk its roads, dwells a power the Golden Order has long sought to keep contained. Where the 2 fingers speak for an order built on grace and gods and the long inheritance of the Erdtree, the 3 fingers answer to something far older and far less concerned with order of any kind, a source of madness and fire that consumes reason itself in those who draw near it. Those who touch this power are marked by it, their eyes burning gold, their minds unraveling into a single consuming purpose. To see everything without exception reduced to ash. This is the power whose sign rests sealed upon Melina's own face. Whatever the precise meaning of the mark, its presence links her, however distantly, to the very force that the Golden Order fears above nearly all others. It is not the sign of the flame Melina herself is meant to kindle at the Erdtree, a different and more deliberate fire tied to her mother's own purpose. It is something else, something that seems to sit within her as a danger rather than a duty, held closed and contained rather than offered as a gift. Why such a mark should rest upon a daughter born within the Erdtree itself, sealed by whatever hand placed it there, is a question the lands between never answers outright. It may be a warning, a sign meant to caution others against some latent danger in her. It may be a form of protection, a seal placed upon her specifically to hold back a susceptibility she might otherwise have no defense against. Whatever its purpose, the mark ties Melina, gentle and careful as she seems, to the single most dangerous power the Golden Order has ever tried to contain, a thread of quiet menace running beneath everything soft and kind about her manner. There is a reading worth considering here, one the lands between never confirms but which fits the shape of her whole story. If Melina was born within the depths of a mother's long imprisonment, shaped by grief and ruin rather than by the golden age that came before her siblings, she may have come into being closer to chaos than any of Marika's other children. Born in circumstances where the boundary between the Golden Order and the older, wilder powers it had long suppressed had already begun to thin. A daughter conceived under such conditions might carry some trace of that thinning within her own nature, a vulnerability her mother recognized and moved swiftly to seal away before it could take hold. If this reading holds any truth, then the mark upon her eye is not an accident of birth, but a direct consequence of it, evidence that Melina's unusual origin carried unusual risks alongside its unusual intimacy with the tree itself. She would be, in this telling, a daughter born at the very edge of 2 powers that despise one another, marked from her earliest moment by a danger her mother judged serious enough to seal shut before the world had even met her. It would explain, too, why she alone among Marika's children bears such a sign, her siblings having been spared whatever circumstance of her birth left this particular shadow upon her. A warning wrapped in care. Melina speaks of this power only once, in words shaped less like confession and more like warning, urging the Tarnished never to seek out what her sealed eye represents. If the Tarnished presses Melina on the matter, or draws near enough to the danger that she feels compelled to speak, she offers not an explanation of the mark itself, but a warning about the power it names. She tells the Tarnished, in words far more urgent than her usual careful reserve allows, that they must never seek out the three fingers, never let themselves be touched by the frenzy that flows from them. She speaks of what such a touch would mean, an ending not merely to one life or one kingdom, but to the whole cycle of births and deaths that gives the world its shape, consumed entirely by a fire that leaves nothing behind to begin again. This warning reveals something Melina rarely shows so plainly elsewhere in her long companionship with the Tarnished. A fierce and unambiguous care for the continuation of life itself. She, who exists as something closer to spirit than flesh, who has already lost some part of her own body to a fate the Tarnished can only guess at, still speaks with unmistakable urgency about preserving the world's capacity to keep bringing new life into being. Whatever cost her own purpose demands of her, she does not wish that cost extended to everything and everyone, an ending so complete that nothing would remain to inherit whatever came after. There is a tenderness folded into this warning that is easy to miss beneath its urgency. Melina is not merely describing a danger in the abstract. She is asking the Tarnished, the one companion she has ever had, to stay clear of a fate she seems to fear with unusual intensity. Whether this fear comes from something she has witnessed, something she has been warned of in turn, or some deeper knowledge of what the mark upon her own eye represents, she chooses to spend one of her rare moments of open urgency protecting the Tarnished from a danger. Rather than speaking of her own purpose, she clearly wishes never to see realized. What the seal might hold back. Should the warning ever go unheeded, the lands between hints that the seal upon Melina's eye would not remain closed forever, and that what lies behind it might be far more terrible than a simple mark. The lands between never shows the Tarnished what becomes of Melina's sealed eye under ordinary circumstances, for her warning is meant to ensure such circumstances never arise. But should the Tarnished defy her, seeking out the very power she cautions against, and letting the frenzy take hold of them, Melina's response reveals what the seal may have been holding back all along. She does not merely grieve or plead further. She turns, in that moment, towards something closer to wrath, declaring that she will pursue the one who has broken her warning with the very death her own purpose was meant to unleash upon the golden tree, and never upon a companion. And in this transformation, her sealed eye no longer remains sealed. Where the mark once sat closed and quiet upon her face, it opens, mirroring the fire that has consumed the very companion she once tended with such careful gentleness. Her manner, once so measured and so patient, gives way to something far more terrible. A grief turned entirely to purpose, the frenzy she warned against seeming to have touched some part of her as well, even as she stands against it rather than within it. This turn from gentleness to wrath is among the most striking transformations any companion in the lands between undergoes, precisely because so little in her earlier bearing seems to prepare the Tarnished for it. The Maiden, who asked rather than commanded, who offered strength without demanding loyalty, who spoke of preserving life with such evident care, becomes in this moment something closer to the very forces she once cautioned against, wielding the promise of death against the one companion she had chosen for herself. It is not that her care was false. Rather, it is that the care itself betrayed so utterly curdles into something as fierce as the warning she gave was gentle. There is a bitter symmetry worth marking in what she threatens to become. She, who was given a purpose to end the golden tree in flame, now promises to end the Tarnished in death instead. The same terrible instruments turned from a distant purpose toward a nearer one. Whatever her sealed eye held back through all their quiet miles together, it seems bound to the very same fire and ruin her own mother's purpose was always meant to unleash, as though gentleness and devastation had been sealed together within her from the very beginning, waiting only for betrayal to prise them apart. It is a fate worth remembering every time her calm and careful manner makes her seem like the gentlest presence in the whole of the lands between. For beneath that calm waits something the Tarnished would do well never to provoke. Some who have studied this transformation closely note how strongly it echoes an older figure spoken of only in fragments across the lands between, a legendary slayer of monstrous foes whose own eye is said to have carried a similar terrible gleam, whose fury is remembered in half-forgotten tales rather than confirmed histories. Whether Melina and this older figure share any true connection remains entirely unproven, a matter of pattern and resemblance rather than any word the lands between offers outright. It is a thread worth holding loosely rather than trusting in whole, one we will return to when her whole story reaches its end. For now, it is enough to know this. Whatever her sealed eye contains, it is no small or idle thing, and the gentleness Melina shows the Tarnished throughout the whole of their journey rests upon a warning she means with every part of herself that remains. What it means to be a companion who cannot be touched, in every sense that word might carry, is the story we turn to next. Tomorrow we sit with the strange distance Melina keeps, even from those she cares for most. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with the strange distance Melina keeps, a companion who cannot be touched even by those she cares for most. For the whole length of their journey, Melina walks beside the Tarnished closer than almost any other figure in the lands between, sharing the road, the rest, and the slow accumulation of strength that carries them both toward the Erdtree. And yet, for all this closeness, she permits herself to be touched in only one careful ritual way and recoils sharply from any other. Tonight we sit with the strange distance Melina keeps, a companion who cannot be touched even by those she cares for most. Tonight we sit with the strange distance Melina keeps, a companion who cannot be touched even by those she cares for most. The one permitted touch. At each site of rest, Melina takes the Tarnished's hand in a single careful gesture. The one moment of physical contact her whole bearing seems built to allow. Whenever the Tarnished gathers enough runes to grow stronger and chooses to spend them at a site of grace, Melina performs the same quiet ritual. She reaches out and takes the Tarnished's hand, a brief and deliberate touch that channels the runes into strength, her fingers closing around theirs for the length of a single careful moment before releasing again. It is, in the whole of their long companionship, one of the only times she initiates physical contact at all, and she does so the same way every time, with the same measured care, as though the gesture were a formal rite rather than an ordinary touch between two travelers grown familiar with one another. There is something worth noticing in how narrow this permitted contact is. She does not embrace, does not rest a hand upon a shoulder in passing comfort, does not offer the small, casual gestures that ordinarily mark a growing closeness between companions on a long road. The hand alone, and only for the purpose the ritual demands, seems to be the whole of what she allows herself. Whatever closeness grows between her and the Tarnished across the length of their journey, it is a closeness built almost entirely of words and shared purpose, with this single, narrow gesture standing as the sole physical bridge she is willing to cross. It is worth pausing on how this narrowness shapes the Tarnished's whole experience of her, whether the traveller notices the pattern consciously or not. Every ordinary companionship carries small, unspoken permissions, a hand offered in passing, a shoulder leaned upon in weariness, gestures so common they rarely register as choices at all. Melina strips all of this away, leaving only the one deliberate ritual, so that the Tarnished must learn, without ever being told outright, that this particular bond runs on different rules than any other. It is a lesson taught entirely by absence, by the space where an ordinary companion's casual warmth would otherwise sit, and yet within that narrowness, the gesture carries real weight. She does not have to touch the Tarnished at all to grant them strength. Nothing in the mechanics of runes and levels demands a hand be taken, rather than some other, more distant means of transfer. That she chooses this particular form, again and again, suggests the contact itself matters to her, a small deliberate act of connection she permits herself precisely because it is bound to a purpose, wrapped in a ritual that gives her reason and cover for a closeness she might otherwise deny herself entirely. In choosing a hand rather than any less intimate exchange, she quietly admits to wanting some measure of the very nearness she works so hard elsewhere to refuse. Do not touch me. Should the Tarnished attempt any contact beyond this single ritual gesture, Melina's calm gives way, briefly but unmistakably, to a sharp refusal. Across the whole of their journey, Melina's manner rarely wavers from its careful, measured calm. She meets threats, revelations, and long silences alike with the same even patience, a companion who seems to have long ago made peace with whatever storms might come. But should the Tarnished ever attempt to touch her outside the bounds of the ritual she permits, this calm breaks at once, replaced by a sharp and immediate refusal, a plain command that she be left untouched. It is one of the only moments in the whole journey where her composure slips so quickly and so entirely. This sharpness stands out precisely because it is so rare. A companion who takes betrayal, danger, and the weight of an inherited purpose in careful stride does not flinch from small things easily. That an unwanted touch should provoke a reaction sharper than nearly anything else the Tarnished witnesses from her marks this particular boundary as one of unusual importance. A line she guards with an urgency that outpaces even her warnings about the 3 fingers and the frenzy she fears so much. There is a vulnerability laid bare in this reaction that Melina otherwise works hard to conceal. Everywhere else in her bearing, she presents herself as steady, patient, and largely unshaken by circumstance. Here, for just a moment, something rawer shows through. A fear or wound close enough to the surface that even a well-meaning gesture can graze it. Whatever lies behind her insistence on this distance, it is not mere formality or preference. It touches something she guards as fiercely as any secret she carries, a wound the Tarnished glimpses only in the sharpness of her refusal, and never in any explanation that follows it. There is a particular kind of loneliness in guarding oneself this way, one that sits uneasily beside everything else the journey reveals about her. Melina has already shown herself willing to give the Tarnished a great deal, her strength through every rune she channels, her guidance at every crossroads, even fragments of a purpose she carries alone. And yet, the smallest, most ordinary form of comfort remains the one thing she cannot risk extending. It is a strange kind of generosity that gives so freely in every register, except the one most companions would consider the simplest, a closeness offered everywhere but in the body itself. Even a spirit as guarded as hers, it seems, still wishes to be understood as generous, rather than merely distant. This gap between what she gives and what she withholds may say as much about her as any of her more deliberate confessions. A companion who speaks with such care, who measures every word before offering it, might reasonably be expected to guard her physical self with the same deliberate caution. But the sharpness of her refusal suggests something beyond mere caution, an instinct closer to alarm than to policy, as though the danger a careless touch might pose to her is not a possibility she has calmly weighed, but a threat she has learned, somewhere in whatever past she never discloses in whole, to fear on instinct alone. A body too fragile to bear it. Melina's refusal of touch may connect to the very frailty of her existence first hinted at earlier in the journey, a body already spent that cannot bear contact the way an ordinary body could. Recall what the Lands Between has already suggested about the true state of Melina's body. Diminished, perhaps already lost in some essential way, sustained more by will and purpose than by ordinary flesh. If this is so, then her insistence on avoiding touch may be less a matter of preference than of simple necessity, a body too fragile or too incomplete to withstand contact that an ordinary traveller would barely notice. What seems, on the surface, like a boundary of dignity or reserve may in truth be a boundary of survival, a careful avoidance of anything that might disturb whatever fragile arrangement keeps her present in the world at all. This reading casts the one exception, the ritual touch at each site of grace, in a different light as well. Perhaps this single gesture is permitted precisely because it is bound so tightly to purpose and ritual, a controlled and deliberate contact, rather than the unpredictable touch of casual affection. She can prepare herself for it, shape it to a form she trusts, in a way she cannot prepare for a sudden or spontaneous gesture from a companion who does not yet know the true cost such contact might carry. The narrowness of what she allows herself may be, in the end, a narrow path worn with care between necessity and danger, rather than a simple matter of temperament. And there is a particular sorrow in imagining her existence this way, a companion who must hold even simple affection at arm's length, not because she does not wish for closeness, but because closeness itself might undo her. She walks beside the Tarnished for the whole of a long and dangerous journey, offering guidance, strength, and a rare kind of honesty, and yet must guard herself against the very gestures of comfort that closeness would ordinarily invite. If her body is indeed as fragile as her words suggest, then every mile she walks beside the Tarnished is itself a kind of quiet courage, a spirit holding itself together by will alone, refusing to let even a friendly hand come close enough to threaten what little of herself remains intact. There is a further weight to consider in this reading, one that touches on the very bargain that first bound Melina to the Tarnished. She offered her presence at the roadside with unusual gentleness, extending trust before she had any guarantee it would be returned. That same gentleness, it now seems, comes with a cost she never named at the outset. To be near her at all is to be held to a standard of care most companionships never require, a closeness that must express itself entirely through patience and restraint, rather than through the comfort of an offered hand. she gave freely of her guidance and her strength from their very first meeting. But the one thing she could not give, perhaps because giving it might have destroyed her, was the ordinary reassurance of nearness that most travelers take for granted. Closeness built from distance. What Melina and the Tarnished share, then, is a bond built almost entirely without the ordinary comforts of touch, a closeness carried instead in words, trust, and the long shared weight of the road. Most companionships, however deep, lean at least in part on small physical comforts, a hand offered in support, an embrace in a difficult hour, the simple reassurance of nearness freely given. Melina and the Tarnished share almost none of this. What grows between them instead is built from something rarer, and in its way, more demanding. Trust extended without the easy reassurance of touch, care shown through words and choices rather than gesture, a closeness that must find other means when the most obvious one remains closed to it. This makes the bond between them, when it does deepen, feel earned in a way that few companionships in the lands between manage. The Tarnished cannot merely reach for Melina in a difficult moment and expect comfort in return. They must learn to read her in other ways, to trust her intentions without the reassurance a touch might offer, to accept a closeness that asks for patience rather than granting easy comfort. And Melina, for her part, offers what she can within the narrow bounds she has set for herself, her single ritual gesture standing in for all the acts of care she cannot risk extending further. Consider how much this asks of a wanderer, already stripped of grace and forgotten by the world before the journey even began. The Tarnished has little enough comfort to draw on already, exiled and forsaken long before Melina's bargain gave them any purpose to walk toward. That the one companion offered to them should also withhold the most ordinary form of comfort might seem, on the surface, a further cruelty layered atop an already lonely existence. And yet it does not read that way across the whole of their shared road. What Melina offers instead, purpose, honesty, and a strength granted without demand, proves enough to sustain something real between them, a testament to how much closeness can grow even when its most obvious expression remains permanently out of reach. Perhaps this is its own quiet lesson, that a bond need not lean on touch to be real, so long as what fills its place is offered with equal honesty. There is something quietly moving in a bond built this way, shaped as much by what it withholds as by what it gives. Melina remains, throughout the whole of their journey, a companion the Tarnished can trust, but never quite hold. Present in every sense that matters except the one that comes most naturally to the living. Whatever else her strange nature costs her, it asks this of her constantly, to walk beside someone, to guide them, to care for them in whatever fashion her fragile existence permits, while keeping between them always that single careful distance neither of them ever wholly closes. What waits at the end of this long and careful distance, and the choice that brings it to a close at last, is the story we turn to next. Tomorrow we sit with the moment Melina chooses her own heart, setting aside her mother's design to claim a purpose entirely her own. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with the moment Melina chooses her own heart, setting her purpose apart from her mother's design at last. For most of the long road through the lands between, Melina's purpose remains a thing glimpsed only in fragments, a duty given to her within the Erdtree that she herself claims to have understood only in part, that changes once the Omen King falls and the golden tree itself bars the way forward. In this moment, Melina speaks more plainly than she ever has before, and reveals that whatever she does next, She no longer does, only because her mother asked it of her. Tonight we sit with the moment Melina chooses her own heart, setting her purpose apart from her mother's design at last. Tonight we sit with the moment Melina chooses her own heart, setting her purpose apart from her mother's design at last. The Thorned Path. With Morgoth defeated and the royal capital claimed, the Tarnished finds the way to the Erdtree sealed by thorns, a barrier that forces Melina's purpose into the open at last. The road to the Erdtree does not end just because the Tarnished has overcome the greatest defender of the Golden Capital. Morgoth, the Omen King, guarded Lendil with a devotion that never wavered, and his fall clears the city, but not the path beyond it. When the Tarnished at last stands before the Golden Tree itself, they find it sealed, wrapped in a wall of thorns grown thick enough to bar any traveller from approaching its roots. The tree that Marika once tended, that gave the Golden Age its name, now stands closed against the very Tarnished it once called home to seek. This barrier changes the shape of the whole journey. Until this point, the Tarnished's task had seemed straightforward enough in its broad outline, however difficult in its particulars. Gather the great runes, prove worthy, and stand at last before the Erdtree to claim whatever destiny awaited there. The thorns make plain that this straightforward path no longer exists, if it ever did at all. Something else is required now, some further act the ordinary trials of the road cannot supply, and the Tarnished has no way to guess what that act might be without turning to the one companion who has walked beside them since the very beginning. There is a fitting symbolism in thorns as the obstacle chosen for this moment, where the demigods of the Shattering warred with sword and sorcery, blocking the Erdtree with armies and shattered runes. This final barrier belongs to the tree itself, a defense grown rather than wielded, as though the Golden Tree had sealed itself against intrusion the moment its old order collapsed beyond all repair. It is not a foe to be defeated in open battle, not a rival demigod with a great rune to claim. It is a living wall, patient and silent, guarding the one thing every warring power in the lands between had ultimately failed to reach, the root of the order they had spent an age fighting over. And there is something quietly telling in how the Tarnished cannot merely cut or burn their way through this barrier without Melina's guidance. For all the might a Tarnished may have gathered across the long road, the great weapons and hard-won sorceries, none of it suffices against thorns grown from the will of a sealed god. Only the purpose Melina carries, given to her within the tree by the very being who raised this barrier, holds any hope of parting it. The Tarnished strength has carried them this far, but strength alone cannot finish the journey. Only Melina's long-guarded purpose can open what lies beyond. It is here, before the sealed tree, that Melina steps forward with words she has withheld until now. She has known, since long before this moment, what standing before this barrier would demand. But she has waited, whether from caution or from some quieter reluctance, to speak the whole of her purpose before it was needed, until the thorns themselves left no other course. The barrier is not only an obstacle in the Tarnished's path, it is the moment Melina's long silence gives way, at last, to plain speech. There is a mercy, of a kind, in how long she waited to speak. Had she told the Tarnished the whole of her purpose at their very first meeting, the bargain at the roadside might never have been struck at all. The weight of what lay ahead too great for a stranger to accept before any trust had grown between them. By waiting until the road itself demanded the truth, Melina allowed the Tarnished to grow strong, to grow familiar with her presence. to build something resembling friendship before being asked to accept the enormity of what that friendship would later require. Whether this was calculation on her part or simple instinct, the timing of her confession spared the Tarnished a burden they were not yet ready to carry. It is, perhaps, the truest measure of how far their bond had already come by this point in the road, that Melina judged the Tarnished ready, at last, to hear the whole of what she had carried alone for so long. The purpose revealed in full. Before the sealed tree, Melina explains at last what her purpose has always demanded, that the Erdtree itself must burn before the Tarnished can go any further. The words Melina offers before the thorned tree carry a weight none of her earlier hints quite prepared the Tarnished for. The golden tree, she explains, must be given to flame. Only by burning it can the roots beneath be reached, and only at those roots lies what the Tarnished still needs to claim the destiny set before them. This is the purpose her mother gave her within the Erdtree, spoken plainly for the first time, not to restore the golden tree, not to mend what the shattering had broken, but to see it consumed entirely, its long unbroken reign over the lands between, brought to an end by fire. It is a purpose that reframes everything the Tarnished has understood about their own journey up to this point. The two fingers called them home to mend the Elden ring, to become a new Elden Lord beneath the Erdtree's continued authority. Melina's purpose asked for something closer to the opposite, ending rather than continuity, ruin rather than restoration, the golden tree itself reduced to ash, so that whatever comes after might have room to take its place. The two purposes had walked the same road together for so long that their difference could remain hidden. Before the thorns, that difference can hide no longer. And there is a particular gravity in hearing this purpose from Melina herself, spoken without the careful evasions that marked so much of her earlier speech. She does not soften the act she describes, does not pretend the burning of the Erdtree is some minor necessity easily set aside once accomplished. She names it for what it is, the ending of the golden tree that has stood at the heart of the lands between since before living memory, an act so vast that even speaking it aloud seems to cost her something. Whatever composure she has kept across the whole of their journey, this confession asks more of it than nearly anything that has come before. It is worth pausing on what this revelation means for the Tarnished's own understanding of the road behind them. Every rune surrendered at every sight of grace, every mile walked in Melina's quiet company, had been building toward this moment, without either of them saying so outright. The Tarnished had grown strong, believing perhaps that this strength served the mending of a broken order. It instead served its ending, a purpose kept just out of sight until the thorns themselves demanded it be spoken. There is a kind of quiet reckoning in this, the discovery that the whole shape of the journey so far has pointed toward an act far larger than anything the bargain at the roadside first implied. And yet Melina offers no apology for the scale of what she has withheld. She does not frame her earlier silence as deception, nor does she ask forgiveness for having carried so vast a purpose without naming it sooner. She lays the truth before the Tarnished now that the moment has come, to lay it bare, trusting, as she has trusted from their very first meeting, that the bond between them can bear the weight of what she asks. Whether that trust proves well placed is a question only the road ahead can answer, but she extends it here with the same quiet steadiness that has marked every other part of her strange and careful companionship. Not only my mother's design. Alongside this revelation, Melina makes a further claim, one that marks the clearest turn in her whole character across the journey. that this purpose has become her own, and not merely an instruction she carries out of obligation. Having named what must be done, Melina goes further still, offering the Tarnished something she has never quite said outright before. She admits that the purpose her mother gave her, within the Erdtree, long ago, has become something more than an inherited duty carried out because her mother demanded it. Across the long road they have shared, she has come to want this outcome for herself, to set her own heart upon the world that might follow the burning, whatever her mother's original reasons for demanding it might have been. This is a striking admission from a daughter who has spoken of her mother only with careful, guarded reverence through the whole of the journey. Marika's purpose set Melina upon this road in the first place, gave her a task before she had any means of choosing otherwise, shaped the whole of her strange existence around an ending she did not decide to seek. And yet, somewhere across the long miles walked beside the Tarnished, Melina claims to have made this purpose her own, no longer merely her mother's design carried out by an obedient daughter, but a future she herself has come to desire. Consider what it might mean for a purpose to change in this way, from imposed duty to chosen desire, without the purpose itself ever changing at all. The act Melina describes, the burning of the Erdtree, remains the very thing her mother demanded from the start. What has changed is not the task, but Melina's relationship to it, the reasons she now gives herself for carrying it forward. This is, in its own quiet way, a kind of freedom rarer than choosing a wholly different path, the freedom to take up an inherited burden and make it, through the slow accumulation of one's own reasons and one's own road, wholly one's own. It is worth asking what, across the long journey with the Tarnished, might have brought about this shift. Melina began this road as a solitary purpose given voice, a daughter carrying out an instruction she barely understood in a world that offered her no other companion to share it with. She ends this stretch of the journey speaking of the same purpose as something she wants, in the company of the first true companion she has ever had. It is not difficult to imagine that the company itself, the long shared miles, and the slow trust built without the ordinary comfort of touch, played some part in this change, a solitary duty becoming, through companionship, something closer to a chosen future. There is a question worth sitting with here that the lands between leaves entirely to the listener, whether Melina's claim reflects a true change in her heart, or whether it is, in its own way, a kind of comfort she offers herself before an act she cannot avoid regardless of how she feels about it. Both readings fit the moment equally well. A daughter who has come in earnest to embrace her purpose, and a daughter who has only made peace with a fate she was never free to refuse, might speak in nearly identical words before the same sealed tree. The lands between does not resolve this ambiguity, leaving Melina's declaration to stand as both possibilities at once, a claim of chosen desire that might also be the last comfort of an inescapable duty. There is real courage in this claim, however quietly it is made. To admit that one's whole purpose was given rather than chosen is difficult enough. To then claim that purpose as one's own, despite its origin, asks for a different kind of honesty altogether. Melina does not use this moment to distance herself from her mother, nor does she claim credit for a purpose she did not invent. She states this plainly, without further elaboration, that whatever began as her mother's design has become. Across the road, she has walked with the Tarnished, something she wants for reasons that are now entirely her own. There is a final layer worth marking in this declaration, one that reaches beyond Melina's own story and touches the Tarnished as well. In claiming her purpose as her own, Melina implicitly offers the Tarnished the same invitation. To see the road ahead not merely as an obligation forced upon a forgotten wanderer by distant powers, but as something the Tarnished too might come to choose for reasons entirely their own. Whatever the two fingers intended, whatever Melina's mother demanded, the two travellers standing before the sealed tree have, each in their own way, begun to make this journey their own, shaped by choices neither of them was originally given the freedom to make. What that choice will cost Melina, and how she comes at last to fulfill the purpose she has claimed, is the story we turn to next. Tomorrow, we sit with the Kindling itself, the sacrifice Melina makes at the Forge of the Giants to see the golden tree burned. Sleep well. Tomorrow, we sit with the Kindling, the sacrifice Melina makes at the Forge of the Giants to see the golden tree burned at last. Every mile Melina has walked beside the Tarnished, every purpose she has carried since her mother first spoke it within the Erdtree, has led toward a single place among the frozen peaks of the mountain tops of the giants. There, at an ancient forge built by hands long turned to dust, Melina completes the purpose that has shaped the whole of her strange existence, and the golden tree at last meets the fire she was always meant to bring it. Tonight we sit with the Kindling, the sacrifice Melina makes at the Forge of the Giants to see the golden tree burned at last. Tonight we sit with the Kindling, the sacrifice Melina makes at the Forge of the Giants to see the golden tree burned at last. The journey to the forge. Beyond the thorned tree, the road leads upward into the frozen heights of the mountain tops of the giants, toward an ancient forge built for a fire the world has not seen kindled in an age. Once Melina has spoken her purpose in full, the road ahead grows harder and colder in equal measure. It climbs beyond the golden lowlands the Tarnished has known through most of the journey, past ruined settlements and frozen battlefields, into the high and bitter reaches where giants once made their home before some ancient war reduced their kind to little more than bones scattered across the snow. At the height of this cold and broken country stands the Forge of the Giants, a colossal structure raised for purposes the lands between remembers only in fragments, its great furnace cold and silent for longer than any living memory can account for. This forge was built, in ages long past, to kindle a fire terrible enough to be called the Flame of Ruin, a blaze capable of consuming what almost nothing else in the lands between could touch. Whatever hands raised this structure understood, even then, that some fires require more than ordinary fuel, more than wood or oil, or the common substances that feed an ordinary flame. The Flame of Ruin demands something else entirely, a fuel suited to the scale of what it is meant to destroy. It is this fuel that Melina has carried within herself, unspoken, since the very beginning of the road, a burden folded so quietly into her strange existence that even the Tarnished, walking beside her for so long, could not have named it before this final climb made it plain. The climb to the forge is, in its way, the quietest stretch of the whole journey. Melina says little as the path grows steeper and the air grows colder, and the Tarnished, whatever they might wish to ask, finds few words adequate to the weight of what waits ahead. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over companions walking towards something both of them understand, and neither is quite ready to name aloud, and this silence accompanies the two of them for the whole of the climb, broken only by the wind and the crunch of frost beneath their feet. There is something fitting in the landscape itself, cold and broken and littered with the bones of a race that met its own ending in ages long past. The giants who once ruled these heights are gone now. Their war and their downfall reduced to scattered ruins and frozen remains. A whole civilization reduced to little more than a landscape for others to walk through. Melina and the Tarnished climb through the remnants of one ending on their way to bring about another. The frozen bones of forgotten giants, a silent reminder that even the mightiest powers find their own fires waiting for them in the end, however long delayed. And there is a certain mercy in how little either companion says as the climb continues. Words, in a moment like this, risk doing more harm than silence. To speak plainly of what waits at the forge would be to force the Tarnished to sit with dread for every remaining mile of the ascent, and Melina, whose whole manner has always favoured careful restraint over unnecessary weight, seems to choose silence instead as its own kind of gift, allowing the Tarnished the small mercy of not dwelling too long on what neither of them can prevent. The final farewell. At the Forge of the Giants, Melina performs one last act of care before the sacrifice begins, taking the Tarnished's hand not to grant strength this time, but to spare them the sight of what must happen next. When the Tarnished at last reaches the forge, Melina does not delay what has been so long in coming. She reaches for the Tarnished's hand one final time, the same gesture that has marked every sight of grace throughout their journey, the one form of touch she has permitted herself from the very beginning. But this time, the gesture serves a different purpose. Rather than channeling strength into the Tarnished, she uses this last touch to draw them gently into sleep, sparing them from having to witness, wide awake, whatever transformation is about to take place. There is a particular tenderness in this choice that deserves to be held closely. Melina has spent the length of the journey guarding her own vulnerability, keeping the Tarnished at a careful distance in nearly every way except this single ritual touch. And now, in the moment that matters more than any other, she turns that same careful touch outward, using it not to protect herself, but to protect the one companion she has come to care for across their long shared road. Whatever fear or grief she carries into this final act, her last thought seems to be for the Tarnished's own peace, rather than any comfort of her own. This is, in its quiet way, the clearest measure of everything Melina has become over the whole of the journey. A spirit who began as a careful stranger offering a bargain at the roadside ends her story choosing, with her very last act of agency, to shield someone else from pain, rather than to seek any comfort for herself. She asked nothing of the Tarnished at their first meeting beyond a promise to be carried toward this moment. She asked nothing now beyond permission to spare them from watching it unfold. There is a question worth sitting with in this choice, one that lands between leaves unanswered, along with so much else about her. Did Melina choose sleep for the Tarnished because witnessing her sacrifice would have caused them unbearable grief, or because she herself could not bear to be witnessed, in whatever form the flame demanded she become? Both possibilities carry their own tenderness. A companion sparing a friend from grief is one kind of gift. A companion sparing herself from being seen in her most vulnerable and terrible moment is another kind entirely, no less an act of care, even if its deepest motive points inward rather than outward. Perhaps in the end, it was both at once, a single gesture doing the work of two mercies that neither of them ever needed to separate. The flame of ruin. Melina gives herself over entirely to the ancient fire, becoming the flame of ruin that alone can consume the golden tree, her long-carried purpose fulfilled at last in an act beyond any ordinary sacrifice. What happens next, the Tarnished does not see. Held in the gentle sleep, Melina's final touch has granted them. but its result is unmistakable to anyone who later looks toward the horizon. Melina becomes the kindling the ancient forge required, offering the whole of her strange and fragile existence to the flame it was built to hold. And from this offering rises the flame of ruin at last, a fire terrible enough to reach even the golden tree that has stood untouched since the world's earliest ages. The purpose given to her within the Erdtree, carried alone for so long and then shared in fragments with a single companion, reaches its completion in this fire. When the Tarnished wakes, the world has changed. Far in the distance, visible from countless points across the lands between, the Erdtree burns, its golden branches consumed by a blaze that no ordinary flame could ever have kindled. The tree that gave the Golden Age its name, that Marika tended before her rebellion broke the Elden Ring, that has stood sealed and silent since the shattering, is at last given to the fire Melina's mother demanded of her from the very beginning. And Melina herself is nowhere to be found, her presence, once so constant across the whole of the journey, gone at last. There is little ceremony in how the lands between marks this ending. No grand farewell, no final words exchanged, no chance for the Tarnished to say whatever might have been left unsaid across their long companionship. Melina is there, and then, in the space of a sleep she chose to grant, she is not, her whole existence spent in service of a purpose she claimed, in the end, as her own. The burning tree stands as the only monument to what she gave, a fire visible across the whole of the realm, marking an absence the Tarnished must now carry forward without her. What comes after? With the Erdtree burned and the path to its roots laid open, the Tarnished continues alone toward Crumbling Farum Azula, carrying forward the purpose Melina gave everything to fulfill. The burning of the Erdtree opens what the thorns had sealed. Where the golden roots once stood impassable, the fire has cleared a path toward Crumbling Farum Azula, an ancient and ruined city that hangs, broken from the world's ordinary bounds, spiraling endlessly through the sky above the burning tree. It is here, among ruins older than the Golden Order itself, that the Tarnished will at last meet Malekith, the Black Blade, and claim the Rune of Death that Melina's sacrifice alone made possible to reach. Every part of the purpose she carried, from her first careful bargain at the roadside to her final silent gift at the forge, comes to rest in this single opened path. It is worth remembering, before this story moves toward its own close, that this particular ending was not the only one available to Melina and the Tarnished. Other paths through the lands between exist, other means by which a Tarnished might reach the tree's roots without asking Melina to give herself to the flame at all. That the story so often unfolds this way, ending in her sacrifice rather than some gentler alternative, says something about how tightly her fate is bound to the purpose she was given, how difficult it proves, even for those who seek another way, to spare her from the fire her mother set her toward before she ever met the Tarnished at all. There is a particular ache in knowing this alternative exists at all, however rarely it is claimed. It means Melina's ending is a road that most Tarnished, knowingly or not, walk without turning aside from it, rather than a fixed and unavoidable fate written into the very fabric of her existence. Somewhere in the lands between, a different companion might have found the narrow path that spares her, might have reached the roots of the tree some other way, and let Melina walk on, still bound to her mother's purpose perhaps, but not yet asked to pay its final price. That this other road exists and goes so rarely taken makes her sacrifice feel less like destiny and more like the quiet, common tragedy of a choice most travelers never think to look for until it is already behind them, the path unnoticed because grief so rarely announces the crossroads at which it might have been avoided. And yet, even where this alternative is found, something of Melina's purpose remains unfulfilled. Her mother's original design left incomplete, the golden tree still standing where her sacrifice would have seen it burned. There is no path through the lands between that grants both outcomes at once. No way to keep Melina whole and see her purpose carried through to its intended end. The choice, whichever way it falls, asks something to be given up, either the companion or the purpose she carried across the whole of the long road. Most who walk this journey, whether by choice or by merely following the road as it presents itself, find themselves giving up the companion. There is a final thought worth carrying forward from this crossroads, one that touches on everything Melina has been across the whole of her story. She was born to serve a purpose larger than herself, given a task before she had any means of refusing it, and across the long road with the Tarnished, she came to claim that task as her own. That her fulfillment of it should so often cost her everything, her body already spent long before this final sacrifice, her presence extinguished the moment the flame takes hold, marks her as one of the truest tragic figures the lands between offers. A daughter who chose, with open eyes, to give the whole of herself to a purpose she had made hers, rather than a mere victim of circumstance. What remains, once the flame has done its work and the path to Farum Azula lies open, is the question of what Melina's sacrifice ultimately means, both for the Tarnished who must walk on without her, and for the whole shattered order her fire has only begun to unmake. That question, and the darker mirror her story might have taken had the Tarnished chosen differently, is where her long and quiet story comes at last to its end. Tomorrow, in the final part, we sit with what Melina's flame means, and the darker path her story could have taken instead. Sleep well. Tomorrow, in the final part, we sit with the meaning of Melina's flame, and the shadow that might have claimed her instead. We have followed Melina from a quiet bargain at the roadside to the sealed tree. From the sealed eye she never explained to the forge, where she gave the whole of herself to a fire her mother demanded, long before the Tarnished ever crossed her path. Tonight, in this final part, we come to what her flame means, and to the darker shadow that might have claimed her instead, had trust between her and the Tarnished ever broken. Tonight we sit with the meaning of Melina's flame, and the shadow that might have claimed her instead. Tonight, in this final part, we sit with the meaning of Melina's flame, and the shadow that might have claimed her instead. The dark mirror. Had the Tarnished ever broken Melina's warning and sought out the three fingers, her story would have taken a far darker turn, revealing what her sealed eye had held back all along. Recall the warning Melina offered so early in the journey, the plea that the Tarnished never seek out the three fingers or let the frenzy that flows from them take hold. This warning was not idle caution. Should the Tarnished defy it, taking up the flame of frenzy for their own? Melina's response reveals a version of her story the sacrifice at the forge never shows. She does not merely grieve this betrayal. She turns against the Tarnished entirely, declaring that she will hunt them down and grant them the very death. Her own purpose was always meant to unleash upon the golden tree, redirected now toward the one companion she had trusted above all others. And in this transformation, the sealed eye that marked her from the very first meeting no longer remains closed. It opens, mirroring whatever consumes the Tarnished who has broken faith with her. Her burnt hair and altered bearing, suggesting that the frenzy has touched some part of her as well, even as she stands opposed to it, rather than within it. Where the sacrifice at the forge shows a companion who gives everything in gentleness, this darker path shows what that same devotion becomes when it is answered with betrayal rather than trust, a wrath every bit as total as her earlier tenderness had been. There is a grim symmetry worth holding here. In one version of her story, Melina gives herself to the flame so that the Tarnished might continue toward whatever destiny awaits them. In the other, she turns the promise of that same terrible fire against the very companion who broke her trust. Gentleness and wrath, it seems, were always two faces of a single devotion within her, rather than true opposites. One directed outward in sacrifice, the other turned, when betrayed, toward vengeance. Whichever face the Tarnished meets depends entirely on whether they honor the fragile trust she extended from their very first meeting at the roadside. This dark mirror casts new light on everything her earlier warning had asked of the Tarnished. When she pleaded with them never to seek out the three fingers, she was not merely describing an abstract danger to the world's balance of life and death, though that danger was real enough in her own words. She was also, whether she said so outright or not, describing a danger to their own bond, a line that, once crossed, would transform the gentlest companion of the whole journey into something closer to the very ruin she had spent the whole road trying to prevent. Her warning protected the world, and it protected the fragile trust between them both at once. It is worth sitting too, with what this dark path reveals about the price of betrayal in a bond built with such care on trust, rather than on the ordinary reassurances of touch. Companions who lean on physical comfort might weather a broken promise through an embrace, a returned gesture of forgiveness offered in the body rather than in words. Melina and the Tarnished had no such recourse available to them. Their whole bond rested on trust alone, and trust, once broken so utterly, had nothing softer to fall back upon. The same absence of easy physical comfort that made their closeness feel so hard-won in gentler times leaves nothing to cushion the fall, should that closeness ever be betrayed. A legend, half remembered. Some who study this darker transformation closely note how strongly it echoes an older, half-forgotten figure spoken of in fragments across the lands between, though the lands between itself never confirms any true connection between them. Among the oldest tales the lands between preserves, half buried beneath ages of golden order and shattered war, are fragments concerning a legendary figure known for hunting the monstrous and the corrupted with a fury matched by few others. This figure is remembered less through confirmed history than through scattered hints, a name spoken by those who study the deepest lore rather than a presence the Tarnished ever meets face to face. What lingers of her story includes a burning eye, a terrible purpose, and a fire wielded against threats that ordinary weapons could not touch. The resemblance between this half-remembered figure and Melina's darker transformation has not gone unnoticed by those who study the lands between closely. A sealed eye that opens into something fierce and burning, hair marked by fire, a purpose bound to flame and to a terrible reckoning delivered upon those who deserve it. These are not small points of similarity, and they have led many to wonder whether Melina's story and this older legend are, in some fashion, threads of the same tapestry, whether her mother's purpose for her reaches back further and stranger than a single act of kindling. But this remains, and should remain, a matter of pattern rather than proof. Nothing in the lands between states outright that Melina is this older figure, or that the two share any history beyond a resemblance of fire and fury. It is a thread worth noting, worth holding in mind as one turns the whole of her story over, but not one to mistake for settled fact. Whatever truth lies behind the resemblance, it belongs to the deeper mysteries the Lands Between prefers to leave unresolved, a question for those who wish to keep wondering, rather than an answer waiting to be uncovered. There is a reason such theories take root so readily around a figure like Melina, and it says as much about how her story is told as about any hidden truth waiting beneath it. From the very first meeting at the roadside, she is offered fragments rather than wholes, hints rather than confessions, a name that admits its own falseness in the same breath it is given. A companion built so entirely from partial revelations invites just this kind of speculation. Travelers reaching for older legends and half-remembered tales to fill in the shape her own silence leaves behind. Whether or not the resemblance to this older figure holds any deeper truth, it is a fitting response to a character who has taught the Tarnished, across the whole of the journey, to live with mystery rather than to demand it be resolved. What the flame means. Set against her siblings and against the whole shape of the shattering, Melina's story stands apart as one of chosen sacrifice rather than imposed doom, a devotion that asks to be understood on its own terms. Consider how Melina's fate compares to those of her kin. Godwyn, her eldest brother, was murdered in a plot he never saw coming, his soul destroyed by black knives before he had any chance to choose otherwise. Ranni shed her body in a calculated bid for freedom from the gods who would have ruled her. Melina endured a curse she never asked for, her body consumed by rot she could not refuse. Messmer waged a war of extermination in his mother's name, a devotion turned to genocide. Melina's story follows none of these shapes in quite the same way. She was given a purpose without her consent, as all of them were in one way or another, but she came across a long and quiet road, walked beside a single companion, to claim that purpose as her own, and to give herself to it through an act of care extended outward even in her final moments, rather than through conquest or calculation. This is what marks her flame as something worth remembering, apart from the destruction it causes. The burning of the Erdtree is, in one sense, an act of ruin to rival anything her siblings accomplished in their wars and their curses and their grief. But the manner of her giving, the choice to spare the Tarnished the sight of it, the choice to make the purpose her own, rather than merely enduring it, sets her apart from a family defined so often by imposed suffering and inherited rage. Where so many of Marika's children were broken by what their mother demanded of them, Melina found a way to walk into the same demand with something closer to grace. There is a particular lesson in comparing her fire to the other flames that mark the Lands Between's long history of ruin. The frenzied flame consumes without discrimination, a fire born of madness that leaves nothing standing in its wake, indifferent to who or what stands before it. The flame of ruin that Melina becomes is, by contrast, a fire aimed with purpose and given with intention, consuming only what her mother's design required and no more, offered rather than unleashed. Fire, in the Lands Between, can mean the total erasure of everything a mind once was, or it can mean a single, deliberate sacrifice made with open eyes. Melina's story insists on the second meaning, even as her own darker mirror shows how easily the first could have claimed her instead, and there is a final measure of her flame worth holding close. It burns still, long after her own presence has vanished from the road. Where her siblings' fate so often ended in stillness, in imprisonment, in bodies broken and left behind, Melina's ending produces something that continues to act upon the world long after she herself is gone. The Erdtree burns on, The path to Farum Azula stays open. The whole shape of the lands between shifts around a fire she alone made possible. She is absent, and yet her purpose remains present in every consequence that flame continues to unfold. A strange kind of continuation for a spirit who was never quite present in the world to begin with. And there is a broader meaning here that reaches past the golden tree and past the lands between entirely. Melina's story asks what it might mean to take up a burden one never chose and make it, through the slow accumulation of trust and companionship, wholly one's own. It asks whether an ending given rather than sought can still be met with dignity, whether devotion offered freely can transform even the harshest inheritance into something resembling a gift. She began as a stranger with a borrowed name, offering strength to a forgotten wanderer at a quiet roadside. She ended as a flame that reshaped the whole of the lands between, her absence marked by a burning visible from every corner of the realm, rather than by any ceremony she gave herself to save. The quiet companion. So we come to the end, and to what Melina leaves behind. Not a kingdom, not a shard of the ring, but a companionship that asked for nothing beyond trust, and gave everything it had to offer in return. This has been the story of Melina, the nameless maiden who became the kindling of the world's ending and its opening both at once. From the stranger who offered a bargain at the roadside, through the daughter born within the Erdtree and given a purpose she barely understood, through the spirit who could guide but scarcely be touched, through the sealed eye that marked a danger she carried and contained, to the moment she claimed her mother's purpose as her own, and at last to the forge, where she gave the whole of herself, so that the Tarnished might walk on. Unlike the demigods who warred for shards of a broken ring, Melina sought no throne, claimed no domain, fought no war for dominance over her siblings. What she offered the Tarnished, from their very first meeting to her final silent gift, was simpler and rarer than any of that. A presence that asked to walk alongside rather than ahead, a trust extended before it had been earned, a closeness built from words and shared purpose where touch itself remained forbidden. She was a companion in the truest sense the lands between allows, and she gave that companionship everything she had, down to the last fragile thread of her own uncertain existence. There is a final thought worth carrying away from her whole long story, one that returns to where it began. A stranger at a quiet roadside, offering a bargain to a forgotten wanderer who had nothing else to lose. Everything that followed, the birth revealed by a distant relic, the sealed eye and its terrible warning, the careful distance and the one permitted touch, the purpose claimed as her own before the sealed tree, the sacrifice given in silence at the forge, all of it grew from that first small act of trust extended between two strangers who had every reason to remain just that. Melina asked, and the Tarnished answered, and from that answer came a companionship that asked for nothing it did not also give in return. The golden tree burns still, somewhere across the ruined and reshaping lands between, a fire that only Melina's sacrifice could kindle. It is the only monument she leaves behind, unmarked by any grave or shrine, visible from every distant hill and battlefield the Tarnished will yet cross. She asked, at their very first meeting, only to be carried toward this fire. In the end, she became it, and in becoming it, she is carried still. In every mile the Tarnished walks beneath a sky marked by the flame she gave herself to light, told slowly, for the quiet between waking and whatever waits in the dark. Good night, my friend.